Hey everyone, welcome back. Humankind's YouTube just put out this video, this Humankind feature focus on the late game, which is something that we have all been looking forward to the reveal of. We weren't quite expecting it this early. I didn't think we were going to see anything until Monday, but it looks like we get the pleasure of getting an early look at it. So let's take a look and see what's going on.
In Humankind, we want to make sure your late game doesn't become a mindless grind of spamming the end turn button to reach the final score screen.
Yeah, I hope so too, because honestly that was a big issue in Civilization. I think the pacing of Humankind already helps with that, with the standard game being 300 turns rather than the 500 turns that is typical in Civilization on the standard speed. You know, you usually don't actually get to that 500 turns. You're going to end around like turn 200 to 250, somewhere in there, if you're playing a good game. So I expect Humankind's typical games will probably end even earlier than that.
We want the end of the game to be as exciting as the start, and maybe even offer a chance for an unexpected turnaround. To achieve this, the Industrial Era and the Contemporary Era both introduce new systems and disrupt existing ones, facing you with new challenges to overcome.
So we know a couple about these things. I don't know if any of these are going to be discussed about or talked about. We obviously know that nuclear weapons are going to be in the game. We've known for a little over a week that there's a pollution mechanic. We know that there are going to be national projects of some kind. Presumably this is going to have to do with the space race, but potentially there are others, so we'll see what's in store. Nice model.
Railway connections make trade routes along them much cheaper, allowing you to expand your train network, which may be quite important as new resources like coal or oil become more important. The invention of cargo.
Interesting. Did you see that? So this is new. This slider right here, export and imports, we did not have that before. So I wonder if this means you can actually choose to export your resources to someone or make a treaty on your side rather than just requiring the AI to initiate that trade themselves.
Become more important. The invention of cargo planes.
Oh, nice. Aerial transport. That is really expensive. But that's a nice addition.
On the other hand, brings even the furthest corners of the world within reach of your trading, allowing you to buy and sell as you please. Trains and planes can also be used to improve the mobility of your armies. You can move them quickly between territories with connected railway stations and instantly between airports.
So, we already knew this with railways. We got to experience that in the industrial era. This doesn't look instant to me with this airport. It seems like it'll transport it on the next turn. I wonder if you have to be directly on the tile or if you can be on adjacent tiles. So if it's just on the tile, I do wonder if there's a limit. So could you transport the entire army, or could you just do like one unit at a time from the army? Because air transport is really quite expensive. So I hope there is a significant penalty to actually doing this in order to grant you the benefit of the super high mobility to move you around the map. You'll also notice up here, and I talked about this briefly in my last video, there's been a pretty substantial increase in the maintenance costs of units. This one single unit is costing 70 gold or money for upkeep, which is quite substantial. So keep an eye on that.
The contemporary era.
Looks like it did transport it right away. Are we on the same turn? Yeah. Yeah, okay. I just had to be a little more patient there.
The contemporary era also opens some new avenues to gain fame. If your civilization is great at research, for instance, you will find a couple advanced technologies that will give you solid fame gains.
I wonder if these advanced technologies are only accessible by scientist cultures. So one of the issues I noted when looking at some of the contemporary cultures is that the passive ability for the scientists don't have any effect whatsoever in the contemporary because there aren't any eras after. So I wonder if when they say if your culture is great at science, if they're referring specifically to science cultures, or if they're just these really high tech cost end of game techs that just require absurd amounts of science to reach. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know which I would prefer, but we'll find out.
On the other hand, if you have a strong industrial base, you can invest in national projects, like the space program, for instance.
Okay. Geosynchronia Satellites. Plus 100 fame, plus 10 influence, plus 10 money, plus 10 science on main plaza. So it's basically a non-competitive wonder. It looks like it provides vision over 33% of the map's latitudes, centered on the project's capital, so presumably there are going to be multiple of these. Yeah, I mean, plus 100 fame at this point in the game is going to be relevant if you are, you know, in a close game. But if people are coming into the contemporary pretty far behind on fame, this isn't going to make a big difference relative to the era stars that you get.
Much like cultural wonders, several of your cities can work on these grand endeavors at the same time.
Let me check the production cost on that. That's only 2,500. I mean, this person only has 129 industry. I do wonder if there's been a substantial rebalance to industry. But 2,500 production is practically nothing by this point in the game, particularly if you can have multiple cities working on it.
Work on these grand endeavors at the same time. They are even bigger efforts than cultural wonders, though, and they require multiple stages.
Nice. First look at a tech tree here. Oh, okay, so there are a few techs here that earn fame. I do wonder if these are all 300 fame. I count 5 of them here. This one is 300. There might be others that are reduced. So fusion reactor, military laser. Looks like there's some interesting stuff. Exosuit looks like it might provide a buff to military units. We can also see the that looks like it might be the Brazilian Jungle Brigade, but I could be mistaken. It's a very similar art concept, but yeah, looks good.
Each stage will give you fame, but also a bonus. For example, successive satellite launches will provide you with more and more vision of the map.
Yeah, so more satellites and you get more vision. So repeatable project, basically, that gives you some extra benefits every time you do it, including some fame.
With the rise of gunpowder starting in the early modern era, battles in Humankind gradually change. As ranged weapons replace melee attacks, cover becomes as important as high ground, and infantry units will learn to entrench themselves for defensive bonuses.
I'm going to let this play on, but this sounds like a good idea. Hopefully this means that in a battle, particularly in cities, defenders will start dug in. One of the problems I had with Humankind's combat, which is really amplified due to the size of battles, is that the attacker advantage is really extreme. Because once gunpowder rolls in, you can take out multiple enemy units in one turn that they're going to lose the advantage of having. So hopefully if you get this dug in, that you'll actually get some of these units that have that at the start of combat as the defender. And you can see here, this is getting plus 10 combat strength from being dug in, which is a lot. 64 versus 49 is, I think that's enough to one-shot.
The addition of machine guns makes the defender even harder to dislodge, as their suppression ability will force enemies to choose between moving or attacking. The advent of powerful
I want to see the combat
artillery, airplanes, and armored vehicles will break this stalemate, allowing warfare to become more mobile again.
No.
Modern artillery.
Let's go back to this. I think I saw something where this tank was retaliated against, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Or attacking. The advent of powerful artillery, airplanes, and armored vehicles will break this stalemate, allowing warfare to become more mobile.
Is there actually anything we can get here? They don't have any of the units selected, so we can't see the combat strength, which is too bad. Or any of the other information.
Mobile again.
Modern artillery ranges are too long to represent inside the battlefields of Humankind. Instead, artillery can support battles and sieges from far away with the bombardment army action. With this action, artillery can support ongoing battles by firing at enemies from outside the battlefield. They can also
So we already knew about this, you got to experience this, and this is why in my last video I was kind of critical of the Ottomans getting +3 combat strength and -50% production towards heavy weapons, because this applies to artillery as well. And that +3 combat strength allows you to counter battery more effectively. So effectively you force your enemy to come to you because you have stronger artillery. And particularly if you're getting now defensive bonuses from digging in, yeah, I'm really concerned about the Ottomans, guys, but otherwise I do like the implementation of artillery.
also target armies not in battle or districts on the strategic map.
Fighters. So that's a squadron. That looks like the Eurofighter, which I don't think is an emblematic unit in the game, but 126 combat strength is pretty substantial. It seems like that combat strength is going to be based on the number of units in the squadron. That is 145 upkeep for those two. I mean, that's pretty expensive, but hopefully by this point in the game you should be able to support this. I'm also noticing that you can see above 2 of these resource deposits you have this little fame symbol, and I don't know what that's about. Maybe ways to generate fame that have something to do with resources later in the game.
To damage or even destroy them.
Starting in the late industrial era, aircraft made their appearance and drastically transform warfare. To field any aircraft, you first need to build an airfield. Fighter aircraft will patrol the adjacent aircraft. You first need to build.
Okay, so we can see the pollution. That's +10 pollution there. We don't know how that mechanic works yet. Though, if I move my mouse, the overlay is kind of covering it. But when I unpause the video, if you look in this upper left here, you can see that pollution symbol, and it has 780 and 187 per turn. So presumably, this looks like pollution is then a global mechanic rather than a localized one, which is fine. It does put people who advance into the industrial and later ages at an advantage over other people because they're going to have to deal with pollution without the benefit of access to all the technologies that the later eras provide. Also, that +1 science on regular district is new. I assume that just means +1 science on your non-emblematic districts. So if you have a really big city, you can build a few of these aerodromes and get a bunch of science. I'm also seeing a new district here right adjacent to it, and it looks like it has something to do with like cargo planes maybe that allow you to trade via planes, like a cargo hub, but they haven't moused over it.
Build an airfield. Fighter aircraft will patrol the adjacent regions, giving you complete vision over them and protecting you against enemy airstrike. Protecting you, complete vision over.
Monoplane fighter. Okay. 55 combat strength, 16 range, which is fairly good. +20 health regeneration from supplied status. I don't remember if that was the same before. That description might be slightly different, but typically you're only supplied within your own borders.
For them and protecting you against enemy airstrikes. All aircraft can perform airstrikes, allowing them to damage armies, districts, or units.
Strategic bomber, 57 combat strength, also 16 range. A very expensive upkeep of 80. Bomber detail, specialized airstrike unit able to damage enemy land units and structures, but unable to patrol or fight aircraft. Yeah, nothing about this is surprising. So it looks like you might use strategic bombers to, knock out enemy cities, basically. Obviously, you could use them against troops as well.
Units in battle. Those strategic bombers and multi-role aircraft are much better suited at this than fighters.
Let me see what that overlay looks like where you ordered that attack.
Much better suited at this in battle. Those strategic bombers and multi-role aircraft.
Okay. So, I'm not sure what he's attacking here, but so you can see estimated damage on some of the districts you're going to do. Looks like there might be some area of effect kind of damage. This guy's taking pretty substantial damage on his bomber, which makes me wonder how effective they're going to be, because that's going to take a while to recover. So maybe having something like the Temple of Artemis would be really good for some of these aerial combat units.
Are much better suited at this than fighters.
That did not look like how much it was predicted to take, so that wasn't too bad.
In addition to fighters, you can also build search and ground units and infrastructure to improve your protection against enemy airstrikes.
So you'll notice he said infrastructure there, so presumably you can build like AA guns in your cities that'll make them more defensible versus enemy aircraft, which is a good thing to have, probably. This anti-aircraft gun, I'm not sure what this is really modeled after. This is not recognizable to me, but you know, we all figured that there was going to be anti-aircraft later in the game. You can also see here there's this description, armored vehicle, which makes it immune to suppression. So presumably things like tanks are going to have this as well. So that'll make the machine guns less effective as the game goes on.
Perhaps the most dangerous and devastating weapon in the contemporary arsenal are nuclear missiles. In fact, they are so dangerous that you may better be off not employing them at all. Not only are nuclear weapons a big investment, requiring research, tests, and the right civics to use them, but you may also face repercussions.
Before we get into the repercussions, I want to go back because there were some tidbits of information throughout this. I think there was one in here. Okay. So, nuclear proliferation versus nuclear disarmament. So nuclear disarmament, gain a grievance against empires completing nuclear tests or detonating nuclear bombs. You can also see that that civic is really expensive in terms of influence, almost 7,000. So it looks like civics have substantially increased costs here, which are going to make the aesthete cultures more relevant later into the game. Now, this fission test, on the other hand, unlocks constructible nuclear missile on, you know, whatever culture you're playing, and you get plus 50 fame. So that's a nice little boost just for simply enacting a civic. And it seems like it drags you towards homeland, which makes sense.
Nuclear weapons a big investment, requiring research.
Again, 2,500 production, at least what we saw in the beta, is not that much, really. These cities are really underdeveloped. You'll notice that it's almost 4,000 BC in the contemporary era, so this was obviously just set up in like a map maker or something. But 2,500 production, I mean, you could have that in a single city. You could have more than that in a single city by the industrial era in the beta. So unless there's been a substantial rebalance to production costs, that's not enough.
Tests and the right civics to use them, but you may also face repercussions. When a nuclear missile is launched in Humankind, it will not hit until the next turn.
That's good, because otherwise you can just target your enemy's missile silos and knock them offline, and then just kind of spam them with nukes. So it allows people to actually utilize their defensive nuclear arsenal, and, you know, it's obviously trying to replicate mutually assured destruction, which, well, it'll probably be pretty effective at doing, but there's really not a lot of disincentive for people who get the first nukes to not use them, I think.
Giving other empires an opportunity to launch their own missiles. We hope this will create tension between the nuclear superpowers as they worry about mutually assured destruction. Even if you do not launch your nuclear weapons, other empires may be in favor of nuclear disarmaments and gain grievances against you.
I don't think that's enough. If you're nuclearly disarmed and there's no constraint on someone who is nuclear armed just launching nukes against you, you're never going to use that grievance because the devastation that's going to happen to you is, totally unmatched. It's pretty much impossible to win a conventional war against someone who is willing to use both strategic and tactical nukes against you. So I don't see this as being enough of a dissuasion for people who are nuclear armed. I do think it makes sense to have this in the game. So perhaps if you only have 1 or 2 nukes and you send them flying, you can get a declaration of war against someone who has tested nuclear weapons or launched one against like an allied culture or something, though.
Will your world settle on a delicate balance of nuclear superpowers? Will you expand the boundaries of human knowledge? Will your people be the first to set foot on the moon or even Mars? How far will you push humankind?
So that's it. First impressions, overall, it's nice to see a little bit more from the contemporary era. I'm a little concerned about some of the production costs that I saw, particularly with some of the late game projects. So hopefully there was a bit of a production rebalance. I still think it looks good. I'm really excited to play it. I do think that one of the lines that the guy said earlier, where he said that they wanted there to be able to be like these surprise comebacks at the end of the game. Based on the mechanics they showed here, I really don't think that's a possibility. Like launching these satellites and getting to these endgame technologies and all that. Whoever's farther ahead is always going to have the advantage in getting those things. So there needs to be some kind of catch-up mechanic if you actually want that to happen, and I didn't see that. So, like most 4X games, it's just going to continue to snowball. It's just a matter of when people are able to reach that point of snowball and how close it's going to be at the end of the game. So that's it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be talking about some of the more changes to the industrial era units that we've seen in the wiki on the next video. So see you next time.